Thank you, and we'll resume our discussions. Welcome back, and thank you for rejoining us without not actually many people leaving. So this session highlights grassroots strategies for peace, local leadership, community dialogue, and post-conflict development. So we are joined by three exceptional peace-building practitioners. So Mr. Tobias Privitelli and Ms. Sara Savva and Ms. Annika Hilding Norberg. Mr. Privitelli, please feel free to have.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation. Distinguished colleagues, I will speak about humanitarian mine action and the link to peace building, with a focus on the Middle East, of course. Let me start by saying that the situation when it comes to mine contamination and contamination by explosive ordnance in general has deteriorated. 6 years ago, we thought we could probably close very soon the Geneva Center for International Humanitarian Demining. It's not the case. We see that the size of the contaminated land is increasing, the number of victims, and of course also the challenges to the conventions, Oslo and Ottawa conventions, are massive. Let's take the example of Syria. Since the change of power in December, in the last 8 months, we had 1,251 victims. About 500 are casualties and 700 are injured. A third of these victims are children. These are victims from explosive ordnance, and the numbers are from UN Mine Action Service. Now, Syria is a very interesting case because with the new situation, where we of course have luckily less violence on the ground, we see what a massive problem mine action is for all aspects of recovery and humanitarian work. We estimate that 15.4 million Syrians, that's about 2/3 of the population, live under the threat of explosive ordnance contamination. This is not just an abstract statistic. It prevents return of farmers to lands. It also prevents opening of schools, return of refugees, and many other things. Traditionally, the international community has seen mine action as a technical task, which can start after peace agreement is in place. I would like to challenge this view. Mine action is not a consequence of peace. It can be a catalyst of peace. Let me give you 3 examples how mine action can contribute to peace building in the Middle East and elsewhere. First of all, it can enable stability and rule of law. If we take Iraq, in Iraq, after Mosul was liberated from ISIS, the High Court building was found riddled with IEDs and booby traps. And only UNMA's clearance allowed UNDP to reopen the building and to restore a functioning justice. That's just one example. In Mosul, we also discovered a big laboratory, very professional for the creation of IEDs, improvised explosive devices, which has then to be stopped and turned into a civilian facility. Second element, how mine action can contribute to peace building, is of course the facilitation of the return of refugees and IDPs. Very often, the landmines remain the main obstacle for preventing millions of refugees to come home. In Yemen, millions of mines have been laid, and clearance is both a humanitarian and economic necessity. The clearance is necessary to open the most elementary humanitarian corridors. The same problem was also very prominent in Iraq, where there are economic interests to open corridors, mainly to the oil fields. So we see that the oil production is the place where fields and corridors are cleared first, usually in Iraq. Third, confidence building measure. We think that mine action in many contexts can be very interesting. Confidence building measures. We see 2 contexts where it worked very well. That was the border between Peru and Ecuador, and also joint clearance efforts between Serbia and Croatia in the past. These are rather examples which are rare, but we also see that mine action is very prominently mentioned in the Colombia peace agreement. And we think that it is an element which could be relevant for a potential ceasefire in Ukraine. What we always recommend is exchanging maps between militaries, where you see the landmine contamination and where militaries would know exactly where the mines were placed. Of course, some mines are placed by artillery, then it's more difficult to know where they are placed. Now, we have a UN Security Council resolution number 2365, which is calling for integrating mine action into ceasefire and peace agreements systematically. I think it's a very good approach, and we will present a study on this issue and some insights at the Geneva Peace Week in about 2 months. Let me finish my input with 3, let's say, strategic messages. First of all, mine action should be moved upstream in peace processes. It should be integrated into negotiations and agreements from the start. It's because it is a precondition for recovery and stability in many contexts. Second, funding for mine action should be treated as a strategic investment in stability, since the returns can be exponential. Clearance can unlock multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects and also create a mine action sector in the country. Third, mine action is a very practical example of the humanitarian development and peace nexus. It is humanitarian because it protects civilians, it is developmental because it restores the land, and it is peace-oriented because it has a very clear peace dividend. I think I will limit myself to that and just mention that if we ensure that mine action is part of the architecture of peace agreements, we will not only save lives, but we will also shorten the time between the end of active conflict and the return to functioning societies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Privitelli, for your insightful remarks. And on that, especially that mine action is not a consequence, but a catalyst of peace. And it should be made upstream, and the funding should be made in a strategic sense. And we'll next turn to Ms. Savva. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to thank you for the invitation for ILEF and thank our colleagues today who came in to listen to our presentations. I flew in from Damascus and will hereby be speaking about the effective conflict resolution and peacebuilding in the Middle East, more specifically the role of the UN, NGOs, and local authorities in promoting this inclusive community-driven strategies for peace. So just a brief introduction. I believe everybody from the speakers so far has spoken about the regional lens of the Middle East, facing a complex tapestry of conflicts, post-conflict transitions, political crises, protracted wars in Syria and Yemen, the legacy of insurgency in Iraq, recurring escalations in Palestine, Israel, Lebanon's economic collapse, have all created overlapping humanitarian emergencies and governance challenges. Across these contexts, promoting long-term peacebuilding requires not only a top-down diplomatic engagement, but also an inclusive bottom-up approach that addresses local grievances, empower communities, and rebuilds trust. If we take a quick look at each country in Iraq, we have now more than 5 years after the territorial defeat of ISIS, where Iraq continues to grapple with security fragility, sectarian tensions, governance reform needs. Millions in Iraq remain in need of humanitarian assistance, including internally displaced people unable to return to their areas of origin due to insecurity, destroyed infrastructure, and land disputes. In Yemen, the conflict has created one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, with over 21 million people requiring assistance. Years of fighting between the internationally recognized government, Houthi forces, and other armed actors have devastated infrastructure, collapsed the economy, and triggered widespread food insecurity. If we shift towards Palestine-Israel, this conflict remains a central flashpoint in the region, marked by recurring cycles of violence, civilian casualties, political deadlock. And at the moment, as some of my colleagues already mentioned, humanitarian needs are acute in Gaza, where blockades, economic isolation, and repeated escalations have eroded basic living conditions. Lebanon faces a multifaceted crisis driven by political paralysis, economic collapse, and the continued presence of over 1.5 million Syrian refugees. The currency has devaluated, there's a high rate of unemployment, deterioration of public services have heightened public anger, and social unrest is still persisting on today's news in Lebanon. Localized tensions and political fragmentation threaten stability. If we take a look at Syria, I have been witness, being there for 9 years now, that 14 years into the crisis, Today, in 2025, we have more than 16.5 million Syrians who require humanitarian assistance, 90% of which live under the poverty line. This reflects, of course, a deep, fragile state almost 7 months after the fall of the previous regime. At the moment in Syria, we see widespread insecurity, including sectarian violence, lawlessness, regional spillovers. Many people live in unsafe housing with no electricity, no clean potable water. Sanitation has collapsed, and this, of course, poses survival risks. ISIS has begun to reassert itself with an active currently over 3,000 fighters. Prison breaks in Syria remain a threat amid a fragmented security apparatus. Faith-based observers note that courts in Syria at the moment are extremely weak, with judiciary often overseen by religious figures rather than legal professionals. This is 2025. Christians emphasized in Syria today equal citizenship over external protection. The transitional government fails to represent all communities as I speak. Official investigations omit perpetrators, as we saw what happened in the coast and what's happening now in the south, which is contrasting with detailed independent reports such as those published by Reuters just recently. If we speak about the cross-cutting challenges in the Middle East altogether, we see that regional humanitarian responses face chronic underfunding with competition for resources among multiple crises. Centralized power structures and political elites often marginalize large segments of society. Armed group activities, lawlessness, as I mentioned, and unresolved conflicts continue to undermine stability. Years of conflict have destroyed essential services and limited recovery and return prospects. These conflicts continue to trigger displacement and economic disruption. How long is it going to continue? I'm not sure any of us has the exact answer. However, if we look at the role of the UN, NGOs, local authorities, I believe that when it comes to the UN and back donors, they are able to provide the overarching coordination framework. They can facilitate high-level negotiations, ensure adherence to international humanitarian and human rights law. They can mobilize global funding if this decision is taken on a political level. And the UN cluster coordination system in each of these countries, of course, ensures and proves that emergency relief is and should be delivered efficiently. When it comes to NGOs and faith-based organizations operating on the front lines, their role remains vital in reaching communities directly, especially in hard-to-reach areas. And today, being a member of the ACT Alliance, I've witnessed the culturally sensitive, community-rooted assistance offered by faith-based organizations across the region in some of the world's most challenging environments. The ACT Alliance work spans rapid emergency response to long-term recovery programs covering climate change, gender justice, migration, and other topics that help to rebuild livelihoods, restore infrastructure, and strengthen community resilience in conflict-affected countries such as the ones I mentioned. The Alliance plays an important role in advocacy and peace building. It engages with governments, international agencies, and civil society to promote humanitarian access, protect civilians, and encourage inclusive governance. Its faith-based network, scattered all around the Middle East, give it a unique platform to address social cohesion and reconciliation, helping bridge divides in deeply fragmented societies. Faith-based organizations in the Middle East have proven grassroots delivery with high-level advocacy as they work to ensure that humanitarian interventions also lay the foundation for long-term stability and justice. They are best placed to promote dialogue and reconciliation because they are trusted by the community from all sides. They act in a neutral manner and they make sure that everyone in need gets assistance. Strengthening their capacity and ensuring inclusiveness, of course, in their composition is essential for sustainable peace. If the Middle East today receives no political or humanitarian support, several foreseeable risks could quickly escalate into severe regional instability, one of which, of course, is a catastrophic humanitarian escalation. Without aid, famine-like conditions could emerge within months. Weak health infrastructure could lead to uncontrolled disease outbreaks. Millions of children would drop out of school. And of course, this will fuel long-term cycles of poverty and instability. Not to mention economic collapse that can lead, and we already see this in Syria, to negative coping mechanisms, and sometimes not only negative, but dangerous. Another challenge which is foreseeable if no action is taken in the near future is the intensification of armed conflict. Groups like ISIS, Qaeda, affiliates, and various militias could exploit power vacuums and expand their control. Conflicts could expand across frontiers. So we're not just talking about one country, but multiple. This can happen through arms smuggling, displaced fighters, and of course, a new influx of refugees, which no country at the moment in the Middle East can handle. In Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Palestine, to say the least, sectarian and ethnic tensions are already happening, but this could erupt into a sustained clash. For this reason, we need a genuine, inclusive peace process that emerges when these actors work together. So to summarize, the UN provides the political and financial backbone. NGOs and faith-based organizations deliver flexible and innovative services on the ground. And of course, local authorities anchor these efforts within the communities through ownership, cultural legitimacy, and local accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Savva, for addressing the acute and fragile nature of the Syrian humanitarian situations, and also stressing the importance of overarching humanitarian coordination framework to promote the more inclusive governance on this issue. And next, we will hear from Ms. Hilding Norberg. Please have the floor.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Can you hear me? It works? All right. Good morning still, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. First and foremost, I would like to extend my deep appreciation and gratitude to the International Law Enforcement Federation for holding this vital dialogue. We often describe seminars as important, timely, and relevant, but given what's unfolding in the region currently before our very eyes, rarely do those words ring as true as they do today for this seminar. And I would also like to say in particular, I noticed in the program that it's the first time that you're hosting the meeting at the UN, but also in Geneva. And I think with current multilateral changes and challenges, the more we can integrate peace and security issues with the type of issues that is addressed in Geneva is all the more important. The fact that you're hosting it in August, that's very courageous of you. So thank you again, and we look forward to you coming back. So based on my experience setting up or contributing to multilateral peace building and peace operations platforms such as the Challenges Forum, a global effort on developing concepts and doctrine for peace operations, and the Geneva Peace Building Platform, which many partners in the room here are active in, I was invited to provide actionable policy recommendations on how international actors such as the UN can support and scale grassroots peace initiatives, and how such initiatives can be designed with local actors, not merely for them. Sorry, with local actors, not merely for them. In essence, I will focus on what strategic role is there for international actors in strengthening grassroots peace initiatives in the Middle East. And in my next 8 minutes, I believe, I have 3 propositions for your recommendation. First, we need to revitalize existing UN capacities in the Middle East. International actors, particularly the United Nations, have a critical role, I believe, to play in supporting and scaling grassroots peace initiatives. Many colleagues have raised different aspects to this issue. Rather than creating new resource-intensive platforms, the focus should be on revitalizing and strategically reassessing the diverse mosaic of existing UN mechanisms in the Middle East. We all know of UNTSO, the first peacekeeping mission, UNIFIL, UNDOF, UNSCO, UNSCOL, and the MFO, and UNRWA, and so on and so forth, each offering agile, context-specific tools for peace building. And people say, well, it didn't work. You see the conflict now. But if you look at each and every one of them against their mandates, you would be surprised to find, for example, the UNTSO, the first peacekeeping mission, observer mission, We've just done a study with the UN and so on it. It's particularly agile. It's been part of setting up 14 new missions around the world. It has a regional mandate across the 5 countries, so it can redistribute according to conflict cycles. It organizes itself there. It has high level of trust. We talked about trust, several of us, in the sense that it has the support of the P5, all permanent members of the UN Security Council, all contributing countries, as well as the hosting countries, including Israel, actually. And the fact that the reason why it still does that is because it's also recognized for objective reporting. The composition of the members of the military observers going out represent a broad range of perspectives, and therefore the reporting is taken seriously. They also have a high level of women in it, 22%, and can speak to the local population. And also, there's a whole range of issues that I think nobody, if you haven't served in UNSO, probably know of. But so I'm saying that it's time for us to revisit, revitalize, and give the UN a new chance to do what it's supposed to be doing, because it is still the most universal actor. A key gap, however, in this architecture is the limited presence of UNPOL, UN police. And of course, this is law enforcement here now, so I decided to focus on that, whose mandate normally centers on capacity building for local law enforcement and the protection of civilians. And currently, UNPOL is active primarily in UNIFIL and UNFICYP in Cyprus, with minimal engagement elsewhere. Of course, it works with the UNDP and Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and so on, but essentially the proposition is to expand UNPOL's footprint across the region, which would enhance the UN ability to support local institutions, foster community trust, and contribute to long-term stability. And it hasn't have to be through large quantities or establishing new missions. We have enough of those. It could be by working in collaboration in so-called advisory non-mission settings frameworks. And again, the UNPOL is already doing that in a whole range of settings. So the UNPOL is not meant for the 10 or so peacekeeping missions. It's actually meant for the 193 member states, and they can work together with your private actors, by the way. So that is important. To strengthen existing mechanisms rather than replacing them, offer a more sustainable and context-sensitive pathway to peace. This would enable mutual capacity development and reinforces the strategic value of tailored, locally grounded operations. Just one more comment on that. A few years ago, people look at the Middle East and say it's just a mess of different missions and operations, and why don't we do the larger multidimensional, much more coherent missions that were then in Africa? As we all know, they all ran into trouble, and therefore I think for the future, small, agile bits and pieces, humanitarian, human rights focused, private actors, but also coherently guided by the UN would be welcome. Secondly, we need to co-design or strengthen peace mechanisms in cooperation with, not for, local actors. And here, to ensure peace initiatives, that they are effective and sustainable, they must be co-designed with local actors. And several colleagues have raised different examples of this, not merely for them to implement on their behalf. And here I take the example of the UNPOL Strategic Guidance Framework, which encapsulates global best practices, including if, for example, in community-oriented policing, which is a valuable but underutilized resource in this regard. With the SGF, the Strategic Guidance Framework for Policing, currently under review, Norway is actually supporting it. It took a decade, and everybody on the planet was consulted on best practices on policing. But of course, now the context is changing and has to be revised. But Norway is taking the lead, and I'm sure there are others, both in this room. I would encourage everyone to see how you can contribute. But my point here in terms of localization is that this also provides a timely opportunity to incorporate insights from host countries in the Middle East. Their lived experiences and operational challenges can inform the framework's adaptation, making it more responsive to contemporary needs. And this participatory approach allows local actors to transition from being seen as security consumers to becoming global security contributors. So by actively engaging them in the refinement of the current international frameworks like the SGF, Middle Eastern countries can help shape global best practices while enhancing the relevance and impact of peace operations worldwide. Third, we need to build trust through strengthened global local linkages. Several colleagues raised the critical importance of trust. And law enforcement actors need to build trust, not only with their partners, but also with the populations that they serve. One promising avenue is to connect law enforcement agencies with grassroots initiatives, as well as global platforms, such as the one we have here in Geneva, which hosts a wealth of expertise on the systemic drivers of conflict, including climate change, trade disruptions, migration, emerging technologies like the artificial intelligence, water hubs. I was just sitting taking notes here thinking this is fantastic that we're having this opportunity to connect our different ecosystems. These meta-level issues increasingly influence local dynamics, and addressing them requires a broader systems-level approach. Law enforcement agencies and grassroots initiatives in the Middle East must have access to global best practices and in turn contribute to them, reshape them for the future. Institutions such as the UN and its agencies and programs, international NGOs, many present here, and the diplomatic missions in Geneva offer a unique ecosystem for this exchange. So initiatives that bridge peace and security actors with Geneva's thematic expertise can foster new communities of practice. And these platforms can co-create knowledge that is both locally grounded and globally relevant. Relevant knowledge that grassroots initiatives and international partners alike can apply to advance peace, whether you're in Sweden or in Lebanon or wherever. By participating in the global dialogues, local actors become active contributors to international peace and security. International Geneva is supported by Switzerland. I'm originally Swedish, so I don't speak for Switzerland, just so you know. I just think it's a good idea. Can serve as a neutral, inclusive platform to ensure that human rights and humanitarian principles remain central to global efforts. So in conclusion, what is required is a three-pronged strategy for scalable peace building, covering joint analysis, concepts and policy development, as well as enhanced operations, as I discussed. It will require revitalizing existing frameworks, strengthen and adapt the current UN mechanism rather than creating new ones, use what is already available, but think creatively to make them more effective and context relevant. And secondly, empower local actors, recognize local partners not just as implementers, but as strategic contributors to global peace building. They are agents of change with insights that extend beyond their immediate communities. Thirdly, to connect the local to the global, we need to link grassroots initiative with global platforms to address root causes of conflict, foster knowledge exchange and co-creation through institutions like International Geneva. And this, ladies and gentlemen, integrated approach, grounded in cooperation, mutual respect, and strategic investment, I believe can help international actors support and scale grassroots peace initiatives together in meaningful and lasting ways. So thank you again, ILF and your team, wonderful, and your sponsors for making this event possible. It's already showing the way for hopefully others to continue and for you coming back when people are actually not on vacation. So wonderful.
Thank you, Ms. Hilding Norberg, for such a powerful intervention and for stressing the revitalization and reassessing the existing UN capacity and also providing the guidance on co-designing the peace initiatives with the local actors. We appreciate it. So this was obviously the largest theme during the whole conference with 3 panelists, and we'll now open the floor for questions. Do I see any questions? Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Kristen. I'm from the UN Secretariat. And I had a question regarding the use of local actors in building trust, which is more related to like, how is this possible in contexts where there is big polarization between the population on both sides, for example, like in Israel and Gaza? Do you have any insights of what this kind of process would look like from the bottom up in these kind of situations? Thank you.
Ms. Hilding Norberg, would you like to comment on that, or?
Absolutely. I think actually I was just going to comment on something I heard from I think a previous speaker as well. I think in a way the focus is really to find practical areas around which actually technical issue, whether it's mine action, is actually a fantastic example which concerns everyone, and it's actually so rather than going for the big political issues, even though you need the United Nations to frame it and to coordinate and to codify it and generate resources for it potentially, the fact that you can look at technical practical issues, which we learn right now is not a technical practical issue, but still I see that as a driver, as an engine for developing cooperation on common issues.
Thank you. Just very quickly on exactly that local involvement. Our ambition is always to support the local sector, to hope to have local NGOs, local commercial companies taking over mine action in a country. It happens not always. It happened in Cambodia to a certain extent, in Croatia, but donors are relatively skeptical, right? Giving money directly to these actors on the ground. What we always support is the creation of a national center for mine action with a certain independence, maybe reporting directly to the Prime Minister. So we always recommend that. And from Syria, we have a request to support the elaboration, the establishment of a national mine action center, which would be the first countrywide institution in that regard.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're, please go ahead, Ms. Val.
Thank you. Maybe to show you another example through water, like in Mauritania, we work with local actors and UNHCR. There was a big camp of refugees settling in Embera from Mali, and we work with the people are going to settle there. So we work with the communities, hearing about their needs around water, with the local authorities and the refugees who are going to settle, to ensure that access to water does not become an issue of tension, but that everybody is satisfied with the solutions that are found. So that's a way of working practically.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. And we're now turning to theme 5, Israel. Oh, sorry. Did I miss anyone?
I wasn't sure that if this, like, I know this from other meetings that this counts as read. Thank you very much for all three talks. Very, very interesting. A quick question to Mr. Privitelli. I was intrigued by your side comment about mine action and Russia-Ukraine as you know, as a starting point or part of a possible peace agreement in the future. If you could elaborate on that. And Ms. Hilding Norberg. Very interesting on like revitalizing, using what is there, what was there. Could you maybe comment quickly on UNRWA, and like is that like completely tainted, or could that also be reshaped, revitalized? Thank you.
Thank you. On Ukraine, I mean, Ukraine has the largest mine contamination in the world, 135,000 square kilometers. And our recommendation, that's a theoretical recommendation, would be to include it in a ceasefire agreement, to have provisions on demining. Currently, you have massive efforts going on in the territories controlled by the government, but nothing closer than 20 kilometers to the front line has been demined. So that would be a major subject because it has such an impact on agriculture in Ukraine. Ukraine is a massive exporter of agricultural goods, so it is of big economic relevance to include that into peace talks. That's the recommendation we're giving to anybody involved in it.
Right now, I regret that I actually said that you had a question. No, on UNRWA and the role in the Middle East, my main focus, I should say, is on peace operations, peace building. So, for instance, ANTSO, people who are wondering what's the role of ANTSO and potentially in Gaza and so on. Of course, Gaza, the Palestinian issue has not been part of the ANTSO mandate as a military observer and so on. That is all therefore to say that I'm not the expert on humanitarian issues, and I know that there are probably other colleagues who are better placed to comment on that question. I would love to have an answer for you, but I don't.